What's up, world? This is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I'd like to welcome you back to Family Talk with my pops, Wayne Carter. Pops, how are you, sir?
Doing good, doing good. Had a great day.
Yeah, it is a beautiful day for sure. And I'm really thankful to be with you to continue this journey and conversation. So I'm just really appreciate you. Um, Catch up kind of where we were when we left off is you were in a transitional period in between your service for the Air Force and beginning your service in the Army. But there was something that you said that I kind of wanted to ask you about before we really got into that. And you said it a few times throughout this conversation that we've been having. And you said that you really didn't know what you wanted to do, but that you wanted to get an education. And you said that a couple of times, and you also said that you wasn't really sure at high school um, where you wanted to be or what maybe vocation or path you wanted to follow, but you knew you had to get an education. Where do you think that idea to prioritize an education came from?
Uh, Probably a lot of different influences. I think one was uh, working with Dad those years, high school and early adulthood years, and realizing how hard he had to work and how really intelligent he was, and and had he had a more of an education, he would have done. Not that he didn't do good, but he would have done things different, maybe a little bit higher level, like as an engineer or those kind of things.
Hmm. And so for I say granddad, your father, my grandfather, a lot of those things really because those opportunities wasn't necessarily there because of the economic times he came up during and kind of the familiar history and all that, right? Would you
Yeah,
say that to be right?
yeah, absolutely correct. And I don't think the idea of further education was really part of my mom and dad's idea or concept of being a thing you ought to do until a lot later in their life.
Did they encourage that with you?
No, not really. Um, you know, you didn't have any choice but to go through high school. That was just you had to do that, and they expected me to go and participate, but there wasn't any great accolades. If I did well, there would have been some accolades that I'd not done, enough to pass. But it was that, and I think just seeing Dad how hard he worked, and realizing how smart he really was. Uh,
Yeah. Well, and I find that interesting because I do kind of remember in my relationship with him and grandma that they always encouraged me to get an education. Now, that didn't necessarily mean to go to the university. You know, they encouraged me to find a trade, right? And granddad kind of even looked at, what being a lawyer as a trade, right? And he said, man, that's how he kind of explained it to me. That's a really good trade to be into, and he kind of looked at it through that perspective of gaining a skill to have a vocation. Did you? Is that kind of the way you viewed education as well?
yeah, I think that's like in my personal definition of a professional is one who doesn't necessarily do it for the money, but does it because that's kind of a calling or that you enjoy doing it.
Something about a natural essence in there. That's
Yeah,
probably a whole nother conversation, right?
yeah,
Okay. I just found that interesting. I think that's something that's obviously in our immediate family that's kind of been important, and all of us, you, my mother, and my sisters, we all kind of pursue continued knowledge and kind of seeking to be good professionals, like you say, and kind of honing a craft in a certain way. And so I found that interesting and tying that to um, the craft of a carpenter and these other crafts and trades that are out there. And the perspective of education, because now there's a shift back to encouraging folks to maybe seek a trade versus a liberal arts degree. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. So that's just kind of interesting to me, those perspectives, on all that type of stuff. All right, so just to recap a little bit, you were living in Fayetteville. You were finishing up your enlistment with the Air Force, and at the same time, you were getting ready to graduate with a bachelor's of arts in political science with a political science focus. And you were approached by a gentleman, I still do not recall his name, to join the ROTC program with the Army. Remind me his name and tell me more about that situation and how that came about.
Yeah, well, the guy's name was Glenn Blackburn. At the time, he was a captain, and he was over the ROTC program that was just beginning at Methodist. That would have been that fall of '76 would have been the first semester that they had this, and it was part of the ROTC program from Campbell College, which is another small college there around Fayetteville, or in that part of North Carolina, maybe not Fayetteville, but yeah, I remember I was in between classes. I was in uniform because I had been working. I was still in the Air Force, and I was in between classes, and I was sitting in what they call a student union, or area where the students kind of hung out at, and I had a little, snack shop and that kind of thing. And I was reading, and Captain Blackburn at the time came just talked to me because I had a uniform on, and that we had that somewhat of a camaraderie, and that's what really began again our friendship. And he had a lot of influence on me, still does. Glenn, I understand, retired as a colonel years ago. I have not seen him. I did communicate with him by letter a bit. But most of the stuff that I knew about fundamental Army things that was different from the Air Force, I got from him. I think I mentioned to you earlier that acronyms and the thing like the 6 Ps and MAD and those things that you've heard, those are from Glenn Blackburn, and so and just learned a lot about leadership. And I think I don't want I hate to speak for him, but I think he saw some leadership abilities in me because as we talked and we would run into each other time and again, he said, hey, he knew I was fixing to get out of the Air Force. He said, would you want to get in the Army? And I had no desire to get any more military than I had. And so we talked, and your mother and I talked about it a bit. And I said, well, if I go to ROTC and finish up there, I get a commission. That would be from an enlisted soldier to a commissioned officer. And I had not really applied for law school or anything like that at that point. So I knew that wasn't going to happen quick. But I did want to go to law school. But I had time. I had time to do some Army stuff. And so, long story short, uh, I I took his recommendation and got into the ROTC program the very end of '76, and then I that next spring semester '77 was it. So I had a really 2 semesters of ROTC and went to an ROTC summer camp, which was there at Fort Bragg, which at Fayetteville. So it was kind of handy, and going through the ROTC summer program was not a big deal for me. I mean, I had been in the military and gone through basic and all that stuff, so that was not a big deal. And so I graduated Methodist and got commissioned as a lieutenant in the same summer.
Okay, so and what's the process there? Because you spoke last time about the Air Force let you go a little early so that you could participate in this program, and then I knew your Army service as far as your reserve service and your National Guard, and then I don't know much about this period. What kind of is your classification as you in the Army? What kind of contract did you sign? What's that situation like? Talk to me
Well,
about the shift from the Air Force letting you go early and into the Army.
yeah. So what happened? The Air Force didn't have to do this, but it worked out. And I guess because I was going to another branch of the military, but I wasn't supposed to get out of the Air Force until like February of '77. They released me in December of '76, so I could sign up in the program and actually be in the ROTC program that last semester.
So
And
you
so,
could be counted for. Were you counted for in the fall? Did you, or just to be able to be in it in the spring?
well, no, it actually counted in the fall.
Okay.
And again, Captain Blackburn, Glenn Blackburn, was very good to work with me on that. He says, you do these classes in December, and we'll get you in that, and we'll work that out. So, uh, yeah, I had 2 semesters of ROTC, the fall and the spring,
And
and
so the
so
ROTC stuff that was more like leadership training, and
yeah.
even is that where you got those what you call pocket training? And I understand what that is. Maybe we get into more of that stuff and stuff like that, or did that come maybe later on?
It both that was introduced, but then that was a big thing as a lieutenant over a platoon, and still learning, the army trade. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, let's slow down on that a little bit and tell me about the ROTC and then the transition into your service in the Army.
yeah. I was like I said, it was leadership classes, and those kind of things. There was some basic um, military stuff too, but I I didn't really need that because I'd already had that, and fundamental stuff in the Air Force.
Well, just tell me. So, what do you mean by that as far as fundamental military stuff? I've never been in. I've got a little bit of understanding just from kind of living with you a little bit. But what does that mean when you say that?
Well, understanding the rank system, uh, the the courtesies, and to salute an officer and those kind of things. Some military history. Uh, One of the things that came up, and I didn't think about it as much then, but it became more important as I got uh, into the Army and my career furthered, was the constitutional requirements. It's kind of a hot topic in the last year or so, but it is a big deal that if you're a commissioned officer, your duty is to the Constitution of the United States, and so there is an absolute part of that where if there's an illegal order given, you have an absolute obligation to disobey in the right way. and whatever that takes. There was I don't know if you and I ever talked about this, but there's a case that came out of Vietnam, Lieutenant Calley, and he got prosecuted for having killed or killing civilians in Vietnam, and the idea was that he had this order to go in and wipe out this village, and he should have said, "No, sir, we're not going to do that. That's an illegal order. There are civilians in there, and we shouldn't do that." And he got prosecuted for that. And so that was one of those things that was taught. And again, at the time, at 19, 20 years old, it didn't click. But as time goes on, and as you get more responsibility, it is one of those issues you think about.
Do you think that your academic studies influence your perspective on those things? You know, heavy in the history, heavy in the government, heavy in the political science, the rhetoric. Did that influence maybe the way you looked at that stuff as you went through those leadership things?
Absolutely, influenced, and because it was my interest, and so those things would have perked with me more than say somebody that's a mathematician or whatever other area of expertise they might have been in. Yeah.
And what about your awareness of kind of the contemporary geopolitical environment? Did you become more aware of that as you went through your studies or as you progressed in the military? Or how did that kind of interconnect with those other things going on in your life?
I, I would think that probably the fact that I was continued to be involved in a church probably had more to do with my political feelings than the military and politics did. And I look
Say
back
that
at,
again. I'm sorry. Say that again. You're say that one more time. I'm sorry.
I think that probably my experiences in the church, the religion upbringing that I had has probably more to do with my political feelings than my education or the military.
That's it. Would you mind explaining that maybe a little bit more?
Well, yeah, and as I've gotten older, and I'm sure you've seen it. Man, you're old enough to see me progress in my life. Last, what are you, 35 years old, 38 years old, ever how old you are.
Yeah, I'll be
Uh,
41 in a few months, but yeah, take all that. Good.
but you've known me all your life, and I'm sure you recognize the changes in me. But I think it was the same. It just become more mature. And some of the teachings that always stuck with me was the fact that we need to take up for those less fortunate than us, uh, that we need to take care of the poor and feed the hungry and give water to the thirsty, and those kind of things that's in that end of Matthew 25 things. And I'm appreciative of the background that mom and dad had for me, raised me up in the church with those concepts. Now, I don't necessarily agree with everybody's theology, but the fundamental thing I think was that as a Christian, we are to put others first of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, but tell me how you feel like that influenced your political.
Well, that's what I was getting at. Because
Okay.
that's kind of the thought process and my understanding of democracy. It goes along with those ideas. It's not a elitist government. It's a government of the people. We the people, part of that constitutional thing. And as I've seen policies over the years, and I don't agree with all the policies of the Democrat Party or Republican Party. Matter of fact, I agree with a lot of Republican concept of strict adherence to the Constitution. I believe that. but I also believe in the policies of the Democrats of trying to help the masses. It's generally been fundamental policies of the Democrats is to help the education, help feed folks that can't be fed, those kind of things. And diplomacy and foreign relation has more to do with building relationship than it does bombing people. So those are the fundamental concept I think I got out of church.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so did your academic pursuits reinforce those ideas, contradict those ideas, or just give you maybe a deeper like you say, you kind of answered that in the maturity aspect. Speak to that maybe a little bit more about how that maybe helped you develop, or how that kind of that talk to that development process.
Well, I think particularly in the area of political science and history, uh, a good part of the political science was diplomacy and studying diplomacy and how diplomacy works and studying the other political systems out there other than that of the United States of America and trying to look at their point of view rather than our point of view. And if you look at history, you can see the successes of some and the failures of some. The Napoleonic failures would have been an example of that. And so, and I think some of the successes of the Americas, particularly the United States of America, had more to do, I think, with the situations of Europe and Reformation and all that stuff come together. And you look at the bigger picture, and it seemed to me to enforce those things.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting, and I like to hear you kind of articulate that. That's fun. That's really kind of that gets me going about this whole thing and kind of what I'm really in this for. So that's really cool. I appreciate that. Let's get back to this transition. And you talked about this ROTC thing, which really wasn't a big deal. I mean, I guess in the normal flow of things, you would go through this ROTC program before boot camp and before this other training that you had already kind of the military maybe indoctrination
Yeah.
that come the onboarding process. We don't want to indoctrination doesn't need to be an offensive word, but just kind of that onboarding military process, right?
Well, and you had stuff like the weapons training that I'd already had, and
Right.
hand to hand combat, those kind of things that you already did.
Yeah. And probably I would say maybe primed you to be a little bit of a standout in that class. Did you think you experienced anything like that in that program? Because you kind of being through all that and being in there with a bunch of college kids that are just kind of really, some of them might just be thinking about this thing, right? You know.
Yeah, I really hadn't thought about that. I think the thing that I had was years,
Yeah.
not necessarily I was
Experience.
an expert, but I was 3, 4, 5 years older than most of them. Doesn't
Sure.
sound like a
Sure.
lot now, but then it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so, what is your commission with the Army? Tell me about the details of that and kind of what maybe the contractual agreements, your responsibilities, and all that stuff.
Yeah, that was another funny thing to me. When I go through the ROTC camp and I get commissioned, and I'm required to go active duty for officers' basic education and whatever career field. And I wasn't particularly wanting to have a military career, so I didn't have a career field that I was particularly interested in. And so they give you these tests, and kind of like I think I mentioned
Well,
whenever.
time out, time out. So, how long was the term? Maybe what? How long are you signing on for with the Army? First off, what is that type of? Because
Uh,
you're not in the National Guard or the Reserves yet. This is regular Army, right?
yeah, and it was the contract, if I remember, was like a maybe a 4 year obligation, but you didn't have to go active duty. You had to go active duty to get the education, but you could go into a reserve component.
Okay,
And the
okay.
National Guard was a reserve component.
So you had to have 4 years altogether. The active time was going to be at least through your training. Is
Right.
that right? And then
Correct.
you could do the reserve or the National Guard. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Now you're talking about what you're going to do for them in this role, and I guess more of your vocational position,
Right.
right? And
Right.
you didn't really have an interest. You mentioned a little bit about. Hold on, give me a moment, Bubby. Come here, Buddy. Come here. Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Bodie. Hold on. Hold on. Don't let him do that. I'm sorry about that for that interruption. I don't want to stop us though because I want to keep on going with this. So we're talking about your vocation. You had said that you had some interest in law school, but you really had you not made a determination, like pulled the trigger on you wanted to do that, or were you still just kind of exploring that concept? And then on top of that, why wouldn't you want to maybe pursue that with the military?
Well, at that point, to be a JAG officer in the military, you have to be a lawyer.
Okay,
I wouldn't.
right,
And so
right.
therefore that was not an option. And what was funny to me about the way the military works as far as my vocation, and I think I may have mentioned this to you when I was talking about when I listed in the Air Force. You take tests, and they determine from these tests what career field they want you to go in. And as a result of that, in the Air Force, I was an air traffic controller because my aptitude was really high in math. Come to find out, my aptitude is really high in math in the Army also. So I took the
Go
Army
figure.
test, you
Yeah.
know. And so I ended up going and becoming a nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare officer. And that was a long, long school. Uh, Went to Edgewood Arsenal, which is part of Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. And it was a great experience, a lot of work. It was not the necessarily the thing that I was interested in, so I really had to study. But you study stuff like particularly in chemical and nuclear warfare, downwind hazards and how to predict the downwind hazard of a particular yield of a weapon, and how long it's going to be around before you can occupy that territory, and you know when you're predicting that downwind, you want to make sure your guys aren't anywhere close to it, and those are very complicated mathematical equations and formulas, and I was okay with that. I did pretty good with all that stuff, and so
And nothing that you do now.
no,
So that's really interesting, and it sounds like we're in a move. We're in this next transitional phase, kind of your life. So to wrap up, was it in 1977 you graduated from Methodist? Is that right? Is that what I gathered?
yeah,
So in 77 you have graduated, spring of 77 you graduated from Methodist. You've completed the ROTC program. You had to do a summer program there in Fayetteville, and then there's the move to Maryland. Am I correct on that?
that's correct. Yeah,
Okay, cool. Well, I'd like to take a break right there so that we can really take our time going through this. So I feel like I don't miss everything, and I can really kind of squeeze as much juice out of the lemon as I can, I guess, if we say
There's
so.
one or two colorful stories in Maryland, so yeah.
Okay, so it's a fall of '77 is the move to Maryland, and kind of shifting to this entirely new career in the military,
Yeah.
entirely new vocation.
Summer,
Right?
fall of '77, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Hey, Pops, I really appreciate it. I'm sorry about that interruption we had earlier. I had somebody walking down the road. You know, I got a good guard dog, I guess. Uh, so, man, once again, I really appreciate it. This has been Family Talk, Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.